Standing beneath the sterile glow of the Silicon Valley skyline, I realized that some people only value you when they need a bridge to cross. My name is Sienna Vance. I am 30 years old and I am the lead systems architect behind the very empire my family was currently using as a backdrop for my public execution. I sat at the primary table of our high-tech complex wearing a charcoal power suit while watching the elite investors of Palo Alto whisper behind their crystal flutes. My sister stood on the mahogany stage looking down at me with a smirk that signaled the death of our blood bond before she even opened her mouth to speak. She raised her glass of vintage Cabernet toward the flashing cameras to announce that I was nothing more than a temporary backup choice for the Vance legacy. Her voice echoed through the marble hall as she told our shareholders that I was merely a placeholder until her new fiancé could take over my entire operation. The room descended into a suffocating silence while I felt the weight of 1,000 judging eyes waiting for me to shatter or scream in desperation. I did neither, instead choosing to calmly signal the head waiter to bring the separate bill for the rare bottle of wine I had enjoyed during her speech. I pulled $500 in cash from my clutch, placed the bills firmly on the white linen, then stood up to leave, without uttering a single word. By the time I reached my apartment, the silence of the night was shattered by 32 frantic, screaming phone calls from the woman who had just mocked me. If you have ever been treated like an option by people who were supposed to be your priority, subscribe now and hit the notification bell to witness how I reclaim my throne. The heavy silence of my apartment felt like a physical weight as I stared at the flashing screen of my phone, while the name of my sister Beatrix illuminated the dark room. Seeing her name caused a bitter taste of iron to fill my mouth, because her betrayal was not just a family matter, but a calculated strike against my entire professional existence. Walking to the window overlooking the city lights of Palo Alto, I remembered the cold afternoon exactly 1 year ago when I sat across from my sister's fiancé Tristan and handed him his termination papers. At that time, Tristan was the chief operating officer under my supervision, yet I discovered he had been funneling corporate funds into private accounts while falsifying his performance metrics to cover his tracks. I fired him without hesitation because my grandfather Arthur had taught me that integrity was the only currency that never devalued in the cutthroat world of Silicon Valley. However, Beatrix chose to ignore his criminal history and started dating him behind my back just weeks after his humiliating exit from the headquarters. Her decision to get engaged to the man who tried to dismantle my career felt like a deliberate act of war intended to mock my principles and my authority within the Vance legacy. By bringing Tristan back into the inner circle through marriage, Beatrix was essentially giving a fox the keys to the henhouse while smiling for the society cameras. The next morning, I met my best friend Kendra at a secluded coffee shop in Menlo Park, where the air was thick with the scent of roasted beans and unspoken anxiety. Kendra leaned across the small marble table and gripped my hand tightly while her eyes searched mine for any sign of the emotional collapse she expected me to have. She whispered a stern warning that I should immediately audit every shared financial account because Beatrix had been asking strange questions about the encryption keys for our private trust. I realized then that the humiliation at the gala was only a distraction designed to keep me looking at the insults while Tristan reached for the vault behind my back. I told Kendra that I was finished playing the role of the supportive younger sister who fixed everyone's mistakes while they spent the money I worked tirelessly to earn. From that moment on, I decided to stop using affectionate nicknames and only referred to them as Beatrix and Tristan to establish a permanent psychological barrier between us. The pain of their betrayal began to harden into a cold, diamond-sharp resolve as I visualized the complex network of patents that my grandfather had entrusted solely to my care. Tristan possessed an insufferable level of arrogance because he genuinely believed that marrying into the family would grant him automatic legal access to my proprietary technology. He did not realize that I had spent the last decade building a legal fortress around those patents that even the most ambitious social climber could never hope to breach. As I sipped my bitter black coffee, I watched the people passing by the window and felt a strange sense of liberation knowing that the battle lines were finally drawn in the sand. I spent the rest of the afternoon in a private workspace hidden from the corporate network, while I began the tedious process of revoking all administrative privileges from Beatrix's login credentials. Every time I hesitated, I remembered the way Tristan looked at me during the gala with that smug expression of a man who thought he had already won the war. The ghost of my grandfather's voice echoed in my mind, reminding me that a legacy is not a gift, but a responsibility that must be defended against those who would auction it for a quick profit. I knew that Beatrix would eventually realize she was locked out of the core servers, yet I was prepared to watch her world crumble under the weight of her own greed and poor choices. My focus shifted entirely toward the digital safeguards I had spent years perfecting because I understood that in Silicon Valley data was more valuable than blood. The betrayal was no longer a wound, but a catalyst that forced me to see the true nature of the people I had once called my family and my allies. I felt a chilling sense of calm as I closed my laptop and realized that the woman who mocked me earlier that evening had no idea she had just triggered her own professional destruction. 12 weeks before the catastrophic gala at our Silicon Valley complex, I was submerged in the final stages of developing the core algorithm for our green energy project. The atmosphere within my private laboratory was constantly thick with the hum of high-powered servers, while I meticulously refined the code that would redefine sustainable power distribution. Everything seemed to be progressing perfectly until Beatrix marched into my office with a group of corporate lawyers and a smug expression that immediately signaled trouble. She leveraged her position as a major shareholder to demand that the legal department add Tristan to the official list of co-founders for my proprietary green energy initiative. I stared at the legal documents in utter disbelief because Tristan lacked even the most basic technical knowledge required to understand the complex mathematical architecture of my work. The absurdity of the request made my blood boil as I stood up from my desk to inform my sister that I would never allow a fraudulent opportunist to claim credit for my years of sacrifice. Beatrix laughed at my defiance while leaning over my desk to remind me that she controlled the immediate flow of venture capital needed to sustain my research. She threatened to terminate the funding for my laboratory and redistribute my entire team unless I signed the paperwork that would grant Tristan a permanent stake in my intellectual property. Tristan stood behind her with a practiced look of feigned concern, while pretending that his inclusion was merely a strategic move to satisfy the expectations of our external board members. I looked him directly in the eyes and told him that he was nothing more than a parasite trying to feast on the legacy that our grandfather had entrusted to my hands. The argument escalated into a cold war of silence within the boardroom as I realized that my own sister was willing to sabotage our family's future for a man I had previously fired for corruption. That night, I remained in the office long after the cleaning crews had departed because I could feel the invisible walls of betrayal closing in around my technological sanctuary. Through the security camera feed on my secondary monitor, I watched Tristan use a master key card to enter my laboratory around 2 o'clock in the morning while looking over his shoulder nervously. He approached my primary workstation with a portable drive in his hand and attempted to bypass the system security to copy the encrypted data files containing the core algorithm. I watched from the shadows of the break room as he struggled with the interface, while sweat beaded on his forehead because he underestimated the complexity of my defensive programming. Unknown to both Beatrix and Tristan, I had already initiated a specialized encryption protocol that required my unique fingerprint and a high-resolution biometric scan to unlock the primary servers. This was the first decisive step in my broader strategy to isolate these predators and prevent them from successfully stealing the lifeblood of my professional achievements. I felt a surge of grim satisfaction as the system automatically logged his failed attempts and captured high-definition footage of his criminal trespass for my private legal archives. The tension in the following days was nearly unbearable as I navigated the halls of the Silicon Valley complex while pretending that I was unaware of their late-night espionage. I spent every subsequent night awake in my home office, installing hidden logic traps within the software architecture that would essentially self-destruct if accessed by any unauthorized credentials. Every line of code I wrote felt like a brick being added to a fortress that would eventually crush the ambitions of anyone foolish enough to try and claim my throne. Beatrix continued to send me aggressive emails regarding the co-founder status, while Tristan tried to act as if he were already an integral part of the development process during staff meetings. I maintained a mask of professional indifference while carefully documenting every threat and every unauthorized attempt to breach the security of the Green Energy Project files. The reality of working in such a toxic environment forced me to realize that the blood bond I once cherished had been completely severed by the cold blade of corporate greed. I knew that the countdown to their inevitable downfall had begun the moment Tristan decided to touch my workstation with his dishonest hands in the middle of the night. 8 weeks before the gala shattered our family dynamic forever, I stood in the dusty library of my late grandfather Arthur Vance's estate. The air in the old mansion felt heavy with the scent of aging paper and the silent accusations of a legacy being dismantled by greed. I had just discovered a series of encrypted email confirmations from our direct competitors regarding secret negotiations to sell our core technology patents. Beatrix had been operating in the shadows to liquidate the very foundations of the Vance empire to cover the massive losses in her failing investment fund. When she walked into the library with that familiar look of cold arrogance, I confronted her about the treasonous documents hidden in her scent folder. She did not even try to deny the allegations, instead, choosing to sneer at me while claiming that I was being an elitist child for hoarding intellectual property. Beatrix shouted that I was an intensely selfish person for refusing to help her save the family name from the public embarrassment of a bankruptcy filing. She paced across the Persian rug while declaring that our grandfather Arthur intended for his inventions to provide a luxurious lifestyle for us, not just fuel my ego. I looked at the woman who shared my blood and realized that she saw our grandfather's life work as nothing more than a convenient ATM for her poor financial choices. While the tension in the room reached a breaking point, my family's lawyer Damien entered the library with a leather briefcase that felt like a coffin for our trust. Damien sat down at the heavy oak desk and began laying out digital forensic evidence that proved Beatrix had been forging my signature on high-stakes loan applications. The room went silent as he displayed the pixelated irregularities in the authorization forms that she had submitted to third-party lenders over the past 6 months. I felt a chilling sense of isolation while realizing that my own sister was not just looking for money, but was actively trying to erase my influence from the firm. By forging my name, she was effectively stripping me of my voting rights and handing the keys of our technological kingdom to her dishonest partner. Tristan began to intervene more aggressively during this period by contacting our primary global partners without any authorization from the board of directors. He was making empty promises about massive structural changes in our management team once the marriage between him and Beatrix was finally legalized. I watched from the sidelines as he seduced our investors with lies about a new era of advanced technology that prioritized profit margins over scientific integrity. Despite the overwhelming evidence of her crimes, Beatrix continued to mock my dedication to the craft by calling me a technician who lacked the vision of a true leader. She believed that because she was the eldest, she had an inherent right to dispose of our collective assets however she saw fit, regardless of the legal consequences. Damien warned her that forging a lead architect's signature on corporate bonds was a federal offense that could result in a lengthy prison sentence if I chose to press charges. She simply laughed at the threat while leaning into my personal space to tell me that no judge would ever side with a reclusive nerd over a prominent socialite. The weight of her cruelty settled deep in my chest as I realized that the mansion I once loved had become a battlefield where I was completely alone. I chose to remain silent during her tirade because I knew that every word she spoke was being recorded by the security system I had personally upgraded. While she celebrated her perceived victory, I was busy calculating the exact moment when her house of cards would inevitably come crashing down under its own weight. The shadow of Tristan's influence was spreading like a digital virus through our infrastructure, yet I remained the only one with the antidote hidden in my code. I left the estate that night with a heavy heart but a clear mind, because I understood that the time for sisterly loyalty had long since passed. 1 month before the elaborate engagement party turned into a legal crime scene, Damien requested a midnight meeting at my private office in Palo Alto. He arrived with a yellowed envelope that had been locked in a high-security vault since the day our grandfather, Arthur Vance, passed away. My heart pounded against my ribs while Damien explained that Arthur had anticipated the destructive greed that would eventually consume Beatrix's heart. The envelope contained a secret codicil to the original will that established an immediate forfeiture of all inheritance rights for any family member involved in identity fraud. Arthur had designed this legal trap specifically to protect the Vance legacy from being auctioned off by anyone lacking the integrity to uphold our family name. While I read the cold, precise language of the document, Damien handed me a second folder containing a comprehensive investigation into Tristan's offshore activities. The evidence revealed that Tristan was drowning in millions of dollars of gambling debt accumulated through illegal sports betting operations in Macau and Singapore. He was using Beatrix as a human shield to access our corporate treasury so he could pay off the violent creditors who were hunting him across the globe. I suddenly realized that my sister was not just a villain in this story, but a desperate pawn being manipulated by a man who saw her only as a financial lifeline. Despite this realization, I felt no pity for her because she had willingly betrayed our bond to align herself with a predator who wanted to dismantle my life. Damien asked if I wanted to reveal the codicil immediately to stop the upcoming gala, but I decided that the humiliation needed to be as public as her betrayal. I chose to let Beatrix continue with her plans for the most expensive engagement party in Silicon Valley history, while knowing she was spending money that no longer belonged to her. We spent the next several hours coordinating with our primary banking partners to prepare emergency freeze orders for every single shared account within the Vance Trust. These orders were programmed to activate the moment she attempted to authorize the final payment for the gala's luxury catering and venue services. The hidden codicil from Arthur was the ultimate guardian angel that gave me the legal standing to reclaim everything she had stolen through her forgery and lies. I watched the security footage of Beatrix and Tristan laughing in the mansion while they planned their future using a fortune that was about to vanish into thin air. Tristan looked so confident in his ability to deceive me that I almost felt a dark sense of amusement at the magnitude of the trap I was setting for him. I instructed Damien to keep the existence of the new will a complete secret from the rest of the board members until the clock struck midnight on the night of the party. This silent war required me to maintain a mask of stoic indifference every time I encountered them in the hallways of our tech complex. I continued to work on my green energy project during the day, while spending my nights reviewing the legal barricades we were building around our family assets. The weight of the secret felt like a heavy armor that protected me from the insults Beatrix continued to hurl at me during our brief cold interactions. She had no idea that her signatures on those fraudulent loan documents had already triggered the self-destruct mechanism of her entire social and financial status. Arthur had always told me that a true leader knows when to strike and when to wait for the enemy to walk into their own destruction. As I locked the secret codicil back into my private safe, I felt a profound sense of justice finally beginning to outweigh the bitterness of my sister's treason. The silence of my office was no longer lonely, but filled with the tactical clarity of a woman who was finally ready to take back her throne from the usurpers. 10 days before the high-profile engagement gala was scheduled to take place, my secure tablet began chiming with urgent fraud alerts from my primary financial institutions. I discovered that my personal credit profile was being bombarded with unauthorized transactions from luxury boutiques along Rodeo Drive and several high-end jewelry stores in San Francisco. Beatrix had bypassed my security measures by using our shared family data to open multiple black cards under my name to finance her extravagant bridal wardrobe. She was purchasing custom-made gowns and diamond accessories that cost more than most people earn in a lifetime, while assuming I remained oblivious to the charges. I maintained a cold sense of calm while coordinating with the fraud department at the bank to strategically lower the spending limits on those cards to the absolute minimum. Instead of canceling the accounts entirely, I wanted her to feel the crushing weight of a declined transaction at the most humiliating moment possible for her social standing. Beatrix remained completely submerged in her delusions of grandeur while she booked the most expensive catering services in Silicon Valley under my personal account. She was inviting hundreds of influential guests to witness her coronation as the new queen of the Vance Empire, while her actual bank balance was rapidly approaching zero. Tristan tried to play a dangerous game by sending me several manipulative text messages disguised as an olive branch to see if I suspected his involvement in her schemes. His messages were filled with hollow apologies and false promises of a peaceful transition of power once the wedding festivities were finally completed. I ignored every single one of his digital advances and focused all my energy on finalizing the mountain of legal evidence Damien had helped me compile against them. The file contained everything from the forged loan applications to the high-definition security footage of Tristan attempting to breach my private server at the laboratory. Beatrix's inner circle of elite friends continued to post flashy images on social media that showcased the lavish preparations for the gala, while the pressure on her finances intensified. She was trapped in a cycle of needing to maintain an image of extreme wealth, while the actual resources at her disposal were being systematically frozen by my legal team. The stress was beginning to show in the frantic tone of her voice whenever I caught a glimpse of her arguing with vendors over the phone in the mansion hallways. I watched her spiral from a distance while keeping my own preparations hidden behind a wall of professional silence and complex encryption protocols. Damien confirmed that all the necessary court orders had been signed and were ready to be served the moment the clock struck midnight on the night of the event. I felt a profound sense of tactical readiness as I reviewed the final documents that would effectively strip Beatrix and Tristan of their stolen authority. The shadow of their betrayal had once felt like an insurmountable obstacle, yet now it served as the fuel for my absolute determination to protect my grandfather's legacy. Every time I saw Tristan's name appear on my screen, I felt a surge of cold satisfaction, knowing that his debts were about to become his permanent prison. The high-tech complex where we worked was buzzing with excitement for the upcoming party, yet I was the only one who knew it would end in a total financial collapse. I spent my evenings in the quiet solitude of my office while double-checking every logic trap I had installed in the corporate servers to ensure they were impenetrable. Beatrix believed she had finally outmaneuvered her younger sister, but she failed to realize that I was the one who designed the board we were playing on. The countdown to the gala was no longer a march toward my replacement, but a journey toward the total restoration of my rightful place as the head of the family. I stood by the window watching the city lights of Palo Alto and realized that the storm I had carefully engineered was finally ready to break over their heads. By 8 o'clock in the evening, the grand ballroom of the Vance high-tech complex was shimmering with the hollow prestige of Silicon Valley's most ambitious social climbers. I sat quietly at my designated table while wearing my charcoal power suit and watched Beatrix ascend the stage with the calculated grace of a woman who believed she had finally conquered her sister. She looked directly at me from behind the microphone and announced to the distinguished investors that I was merely a temporary backup choice for the company's future leadership. Her voice carried a sharp edge of triumph as she proclaimed that my role as lead systems architect was officially ending to make room for the visionary guidance of her fiancé. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly when the head manager of the catering firm approached the stage carrying a silver tray with a final invoice totaling nearly $500,000. Beatrix reached for her black credit card with a smug smile, yet the transaction was met with a loud mechanical rejection that echoed through the silence of the stunned audience. She tried two more cards in a state of growing visible panic, but every single one was declined because I had officially reported them as stolen due to her identity theft earlier that week. I stood up from my seat and walked toward the center of the room, while the murmurs of the elite guests rose like a tide of judgmental whispers around her crumbling pedestal. I announced to everyone present that the luxurious lifestyle my sister had been flaunting was built entirely on a foundation of forged signatures and illegal financial maneuvers. Beatrix began to scream about family loyalty and technical glitches, while her face turned a deep shade of crimson under the harsh white spotlight of the mahogany stage. At that exact moment, Damien entered the ballroom, followed by 3 uniformed security officers and 2 formal representatives from our primary global banking partner. They presented the emergency freeze orders we had prepared weeks ago, while informing the crowd that Beatrix was under immediate investigation for high-stakes corporate fraud and embezzlement. The look of absolute horror on her face intensified when Tristan immediately stepped back and began loudly disclaiming any personal knowledge of her illegal activities to save his own skin. He pointed his finger at the woman he was supposed to marry and told the authorities that he was just a victim of her obsession with maintaining a fake social status. Beatrix looked at him with a mixture of shock and realization as the mask of her devoted lover finally fell away to reveal the coward who had been using her as a pawn. I calmly reached into my clutch to retrieve a stack of $500 in cash to pay for my personal portion of the evening's expensive vintage wine. I handed the money to the confused manager and announced that I was officially canceling all of Beatrix's administrative access to the Vance global server infrastructure. The glittering gala instantly transformed into a sterile crime scene as the bank representatives began seizing the fraudulent documents she had used to secure her luxury gowns. Investors who had been laughing with Tristan minutes before now scrambled to distance themselves from the legal firestorm that was consuming the once proud Vance heirs. I watched the security team escort my sister toward the service exit, while she continued to beg for a mercy that she had never shown me during my years of silent labor. Damien stood by my side and confirmed that the hidden codicil from our grandfather Arthur had already been activated to strip her of every remaining inheritance right. The shadow of the betrayal that had haunted my nights for months was finally being burned away by the cold, bright light of undeniable legal justice. I felt no joy in her destruction, but a profound sense of relief that the legacy of my grandfather was finally protected from the vultures she invited into our home. The high-tech complex where I had built my career felt like a sanctuary once again, as the liars were removed from the seat of power they never truly deserved. As I turned to leave the ballroom, I realized that the woman who called me a backup choice had accidentally triggered the end of her own existence within our world. By 3 o'clock the following morning, the glittering lights of the gala had been replaced by the sterile, flickering neon of a police precinct. Beatrix sat in a cold interrogation room while investigators questioned her regarding the systematic forgery of corporate documents and the unauthorized use of my personal identity. She had spent years believing that her family name would act as a permanent shield against the consequences of her actions, but the law in Silicon Valley does not recognize bloodlines when fraud is involved. At the same time, Tristan was apprehended at a boutique hotel near the international airport while attempting to flee with a suitcase filled with embezzled cash. The authorities caught him just as he was preparing to board a private flight to a country without an extradition treaty with the United States. The reality of the situation in America hit Beatrix like a physical blow as she realized that her credit score had plummeted to 0 and her social reputation was permanently incinerated. In the tech world, your digital footprint is your soul, and she had effectively deleted herself from the elite circles she so desperately craved to lead. Members of our extended family began calling me at dawn to beg for a bail payment, but I maintained a stoic silence while refusing to intervene in her legal downfall. I looked at the sunrise over Palo Alto and firmly stated that Beatrix needed to face the full weight of the justice system to understand the gravity of her treason. Shielding her from the consequences would only enable her destructive patterns, and I had already spent too much of my life cleaning up the messes she left behind. I officially assumed the role of Chief Executive Officer at Vance Global and began the grueling process of restoring the ethical standards that my grandfather Arthur had envisioned. The board of directors welcomed my leadership with a mixture of fear and respect, because they finally understood that I was not a backup choice, but the true architect of the empire. The air in the headquarters felt lighter once the toxic influence of Tristan and Beatrix was purged from our server rooms and our boardrooms forever. I spent the first week of my tenure canceling every fraudulent contract they had signed, while personally apologizing to the employees whose careers they had nearly derailed. True serenity returned to my life when I realized that cutting ties with toxic family members is not an act of cruelty, but a necessary step for self-preservation. Absolute freedom felt like a cool breeze after a lifetime of suffocating under the expectations and manipulations of people who viewed me only as a resource. I decided to donate the proceeds from the liquidated assets of their failed investments to a foundation dedicated to providing legal education for young female entrepreneurs. Protecting your personal interests and understanding the intricate details of the law is not just a professional skill, but a survival requirement in our modern, fast-paced society. This journey has taught me that loyalty must be earned through integrity, and that no bond is strong enough to justify the sacrifice of one's own dignity or hard-earned success. I am now moving forward with the Green Energy Project with a renewed sense of purpose, because the shadows of the past can no longer dim the light of my future achievements. I want to extend my sincere gratitude to everyone who has listened to my story and witnessed the difficult path I had to take to reclaim my rightful legacy. Your attention and support have provided a sense of community during a period when I felt most alone in my struggle against the wolves in my own home. I truly hope that my experience serves as a cautionary tale about the importance of vigilance and the power of standing your ground against those who try to steal your light. Please feel free to share your thoughts and opinions with me, because your perspectives help build a world where truth and hard work are valued above deception. As I close this chapter of my life, I do so with the knowledge that I am finally the master of my own destiny and the protector of the Vance name.